President Trump has signed his first bill into law, the Laken Riley Act. And while I'm happy to see the government functioning, I find this to be a really odd bill to be the first legislative accomplishment, because it's not very clear to me that the bill itself would have prevented the murder of the innocent woman that it's actually named after. What's most surprising to me is that this bill was even necessary at all. I would have thought that anybody who committed any of the crimes specified in the bill would already have been deportable under state and federal laws. And I think even in the absence of a crime, people who are in the country illegally can be deported just for the crime of unlawful entry. The man who murdered Laken Riley was a Venezuelan immigrant who crossed into the country illegally, and his name was Jose Ibarra. And once he entered the United States, he came in contact with law enforcement 3 different times, but he was never detained prior to the murder he committed. So to understand why I don't think that this law would have prevented this horrible crime, let's just walk through it quickly. According to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Ibarra and his wife crossed illegally in September 2022 near El Paso, Texas, and they were arrested and detained by immigration authorities. Now, this is where it gets a little bit confusing. Some sources simply say that he was detained and released after being in U.S. Customs and Border Protection for 21 hours and released for further processing, whatever that means. Other sources quote an immigration attorney from Texas who says that because the Ibarras were from Venezuela and Venezuelans have temporary protected status in the U.S. due to the upheaval in that country, they were released, given temporary authorization to be in the country. Now, that's a program Trump is expected to end, but one of those 2 things happened, and they ended up being released in El Paso. Regardless of why they were released, the state of Texas then took the Ibarras and put them on a bus and bused them to New York City, where they just dropped them off in the middle of the city. And presumably this was just some sort of publicity stunt. But at this point, the Ibarras are essentially just lost to the system. Nobody really knows where they are. They got shipped to New York. I'm not sure if immigration knows that they were shipped to New York and dropped off, and where they went, that wasn't tracked. So to me, this seems like failure number 1 in this case. I mean, is this really how we handle immigration cases when people cross the border legally or illegally? We just toss them out into a foreign city without keeping track of where they are? I mean, don't they have court cases pending and appearances that they're expected to show up with as part of the immigration process, and that's in a specific location? And, with no means of housing or feeding themselves, what do we expect to happen? How did we expect a good outcome? It's just goodbye and good luck? I mean, surely this can be done better. At the very minimum, maybe a process for coordinating with nonprofit agencies that provide services to undocumented immigrants could happen. But I don't know what the solution is, but this seems like a very flawed process. So fast forward, it's about a year later now, and the Ibarras are in New York, and Jose Ibarra is driving a moped to deliver food. So perhaps if you live in New York City, perhaps he delivered your Postmates. And he was arrested again because he had his child on the back of the moped when he was doing these deliveries. And it was a 5-year-old son, and he didn't have a helmet on. So he was arrested for child endangerment, but it was a minor infraction. So New York Police Department cited him and released him. Now, there's some disagreement about what happened here as well. NYPD is just saying that they released him because it was a minor infraction, and some people are claiming that they released him because it was a sanctuary city. But ICE was made aware of the arrest, and they did issue a detainer for Ibarra, but by the time the detainer was received at the New York Police Department, he had already been let go. So I'm not sure what this all means. Was he granted protected status? And if so, then why was the detainer issued? Or maybe he was never granted protected status. That part's a little bit unclear, and I can't find a clear explanation for it anywhere. Regardless, if he was released by NYPD and ICE knew he was arrested and presumably they knew where he lived, I'm assuming that's part of the citation and the arrest process, why couldn't ICE go pick him up themselves if the New York Police Department hadn't detained him? I mean, there may be a reason why, there may be rules around that, but that seems like something that could be fixed, right? And maybe that should have been the target of a new law rather than, this detention process that the law specifies now. So I don't think the Laken Riley Act would have come into play at any point in this timeline so far. Homeland Security picked them up first at the border and released them for some reason without tracking where they were going, and the law does nothing to change that as far as I understand. And then the New York Police Department detained him for a minor criminal offense and released him. But the Laken Riley Act says that Homeland Security must detain people for this expanded list of crimes, not local police departments. So I don't think anything that's happened so far would have been affected by this bill. So back to Ibarra. About a month after his arrest and release in New York, he went to a place called the Roosevelt Hotel in New York City, and he requested a ticket to be flown to Atlanta, where his brother had relocated, because by this point he had split with his wife. And in a process that's called reticketing, which I had never heard of before I looked into it, they actually paid for his travel to Atlanta, where he was picked up by his brother at the airport, and they went to Athens, Georgia, where the murder occurred. And apparently, New York City and other cities, I presume, pay for travel for tens of thousands of migrants from their city to whatever location they want to go to. And I had no idea that was happening, but Texas shipped them to New York and New York shipped them to Georgia. So, perhaps it's a fairly common practice. And, that to me is failure number 3. Why are migrants being shipped all over the country from city to city in this way? It seems like an ineffective way to manage people who are in some sort of formal immigration process and presumably have court appearances pending in one particular location. So Ibarra arrives in Athens, Georgia, which is where the murder occurred. And sometime after his arrival in Athens, he and his brother are picked up for shoplifting at Walmart. And it's a minor crime, so they're released again with a citation. And many people in the federal government claim that Athens released him because it's a sanctuary city. The Athens Police Department says not so. They're not a sanctuary city. And the reason no immigration check was performed, and I quote, I'll read it to you, is because our officers do not have immediate access to immigration status. According to ICE's 287G program, the general process of identifying and removing non-citizens with criminal or pending charges arrested by state and local law enforcement agencies is handled during the booking process by the law enforcement agency responsible for the jail. And that is correct. I Googled this 287G program. You can find it right on ICE's website. And it says that immigrants have their immigration status checked when they are booked into the jail. So this is failure number 4, right? Obviously, this process is broken. The immigration status check is coming far too late for local police departments to even know somebody needs to be detained, even if they wanted to cooperate. So all that said, I don't think the Laken Riley Act actually would have done anything to remove Jose Ibarra earlier, and I don't think more hastily written, headline-grabbing laws are really the solution here. The hard work of reforming this whole system, it needs to be done. So to me, this is a missed opportunity.